The wind is relentless, cutting through every layer of your clothing. The cold is unbearable. Your legs feel like lead, and every breath is a fight for oxygen. Then, through the swirling snow, you see them, bodies, frozen in time. Some are wrapped in tattered raincoats, others, still in their climbing gear, are scattered across the ice. Bones, frostbitten limbs, and faces frozen in their final moments. This is Everest's highest graveyard, and if you look around, you'll see over 200 bodies perfectly preserved by the cold. Some climbers collapse just meters from safety, their frozen hands reaching for a summit they'll never touch, while others vanish without a trace, only to resurface years later. Up here, rescue is almost impossible. At this altitude, even the strongest climbers can barely save themselves, and those who fall, they become part of the mountain forever. For Shria Schmatz, that's exactly what happened. Shria Schmatz. Everest wasn't just any mountain for Shria Schmatz. It was her ultimate goal. Born in Nepal but raised in Canada, Shria was captivated by the stories of climbers who had reached the summit. To her, it wasn't just about the adventure, it was about proving to herself and the world that dreams do come true. However, unlike seasoned climbers who spend years honing their skills, Shria had very little climbing experience. But what she lacked in expertise, she made up for in sheer determination. She spent years raising funds, securing sponsors, and preparing herself for what she believed would be the most defining moment of her life. She told friends and family that reaching Everest was her destiny, a dream she had carried since childhood. And in May 2012, she finally had her chance. But from the very beginning, she struggled. She struggled with exhaustion and had to be assisted by Sherpas as she pushed toward the summit. Sherpas constantly reminded her to conserve her energy and to move efficiently, but she refused to turn back. She had spent too much time and effort to abandon her dream. On May 19th, she finally reached the top. The world stretched out beneath her, the sky a deep, endless blue. She proudly unfurled a Canadian flag, tears in her eyes. It should have been the happiest moment of her life, but the real battle was only beginning. As she descended, the brutal truth hit her like a sledgehammer. Her oxygen supply was running low, and an overwhelming fatigue engulfed her, making it feel as if she were trudging through molasses. Descending Everest is more dangerous than climbing it, and as she made her way down, her body began to betray her. Sherpas pleaded with her to move faster, but the physical pain was too much to bear. She felt trapped in a nightmare, each moment stretching endlessly as she fought to stay awake. For hours, they tried to help her descend, but she kept repeating, "I have to reach the top," over and over again. Disoriented, exhausted, and without enough oxygen, she eventually collapsed near the south summit. And just like others before her body remains on the mountain to this day, draped in her red and white jacket, a haunting warning to those who dream of Everest without fully understanding its cost. Shria's story is a tragic reminder that the summit is only half of the journey. And yet, she isn't the only climber who found herself in trouble just below the top. Decades earlier, another woman made it to the summit, only to meet her end in one of Everest's most haunting tragedies. Hannelore Schmatz. Hannelore Schmatz was no stranger to adventure. As a seasoned German climber, she had already tackled some of the world's highest peaks before setting her sights on Everest. But she would soon discover that Everest was different. In 1979, Hannelore decided to join an international expedition with one goal in mind: to stand on top of the world. Against the odds, she reached the summit. Exhausted and battling the thin air, she and fellow climber Ray Janae made a critical decision. Instead of pushing through the night, they decided to set up camp just below the summit at 8,300 meters, a place no one should ever linger. And sure enough, they soon realized they'd made a horrible mistake. Ray Janae succumbed to hypothermia first, his body shutting down as it got darker. Hannelore, too weak to continue, leaned against her backpack. The relentless wind howled around her as her life began slipping away. As the air grew thinner and colder, each breath became more laborious. In those final moments, her eyes remained open, gazing into the abyss, as the freezing wind wrapped around her, taking her life in a cruel embrace. For years, she remained there, frozen in time. Climbers passing by whispered of the woman who sat, as her body remained preserved by the ice. However, the mountain had more tragedy in store. When a Nepalese police officer, Yogendra Bahadur Thapa, led an expedition to retrieve her remains, a blizzard struck, claiming his life and that of another officer. Thapa had been determined to bring closure to the tragedy, but in doing so, he became part of the mountain's deadly legacy. The failed recovery attempt only added to the legend of Hannelore's resting place. For years, climbers would describe seeing her, still sitting there, frozen in time. But while some people climb Everest with skill and others with luck, Maurice Wilson believed he could conquer it with faith. Maurice Wilson. As a British World War I veteran, Wilson had no climbing experience, but he had a plan: fly a small plane from England to Everest, crash landed on the slopes, and walk to the top. It sounds absurd, But Wilson truly believed that spiritual strength and sheer willpower could get him there. Against all odds, he managed to fly from Britain to India, but authorities weren't keen on his reckless plan, so they grounded his plane. Did that stop him? Not at all. He trekked overland to Everest, disguised himself as a Buddhist monk, and somehow made it to the base of the mountain. Locals who encountered him along the way described him as a possessed man who was beyond reason. Some warned him, others admired his audacity, but no one could stop him. And then he climbed, or at least he tried. He had no idea what he was doing. His Sherpa guides refused to go further. Alone and unprepared, he attempted to ascend, but he never did. Weeks later, a search party found Wilson's frozen body in a tent at 22,700 feet, still wearing his tattered clothes, his diary by his side. His last recorded words hinted at his failing strength but unwavering belief. Off again. Gorgeous day. Those who found him spoke of the agony etched into his face, the pain of an unfulfilled dream, and the bitter realization that he never achieved what he wanted. The mountain had silenced his audacity, but his story remains one of Everest's most unusual tragedies. Maurice Wilson believed that sheer determination could conquer Everest, but no amount of willpower can stop the mountain when it decides to strike. And in 2014, it struck violently. The Sherpa's death. On April 18, 2014, at around 6:30 a.m., a group of Sherpas were preparing the route through the notorious Khumbu icefall. The Khumbu is the most dangerous section of the climb. Unstable ice towers, deep crevasses, and constant avalanche risk. The men moved cautiously, placing ladders and ropes to ensure the safety of the climbers who would follow. And then the unthinkable happened. A massive ice serac, the size of a multi-story building, sheared off the western shoulder of Everest. Without warning, it crashed down, sending thousands of tons of ice and snow hurling toward the Sherpas below. The impact was immediate and devastating. Some Sherpas were crushed instantly, their bodies disappearing beneath the relentless cascade of ice. Others were swept away, tumbling into deep crevasses. Those who survived felt the icy grip of fear tighten around them. The realization that this could be their last moment overwhelmed them. Survivors recalled hearing the thunderous roar of the serac crashing down, followed by an eerie silence that hung heavily in the air. Then came the screams of their friends, cries filled with terror and anguish, echoing through the icy expanse. One survivor described the horror. "I heard my friends screaming. Then, nothing. Just the wind." Rescue efforts were frantic, but the destruction was too great. 16 Sherpas lost their lives that day, making it the deadliest single disaster on Everest at the time. In Kathmandu, families waited, praying for good news that never came. The avalanche of 2014 changed everything, reminding the world just how deadly the mountain can be. But not everyone climbs Everest just to reach the summit. Some come for something else entirely. And for one man, that obsession cost him everything. Marco Siffredi. Marco Siffredi wasn't just a climber. He was a daredevil, a French snowboarder who lived for the thrill of the descent. Born in 1979 in Chamonix, France, Marco grew up in the shadow of Mont Blanc, surrounded by some of the most challenging terrain in the Alps. As a teenager, he had already built a reputation as a fearless freerider, conquering steep descents that most wouldn't even dare to attempt. But for Marco, the ultimate dream wasn't just to snowboard, it was to carve a path down the world's most unforgiving slopes. And no mountain called to him more than Everest. In 2001, he made history. Choosing the northern face, he strapped in and became the first person ever to snowboard down the world's highest peak. The ride was perilous, filled with unexpected obstacles, deep snow, crevasses, sheer cliffs. But Marco made it. He descended 3,000 meters in just under 3 hours, accomplishing what no one had ever done before. But for Marco, it wasn't enough. There was another route, one steeper, more technical, and far more dangerous. The Hornbein Couloir, a line so treacherous that even experienced climbers feared it. To Marco, it was nothing. A year later, in 2002, he returned to Everest. This time, the Hornbein Couloir was his goal. He summited on September 8th, exhausted but eager. His Sherpa team urged him to wait, to rest, to regain strength before descending. But Marco was insistent. The snow conditions were perfect. With one final check of his bindings, he pushed off. At first, everything seemed normal. His team at base camp watched through their binoculars as he disappeared over the crest. They expected to see his signature, fluid turns carving down the face. But then, nothing. Marco never reappeared. At first, his team assumed he was just out of sight, navigating the technical terrain. But minutes turned to hours. Then, night fell, and they quickly realized that something had gone terribly wrong. Rescue teams searched for weeks, but his body was never found. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened. While some believe an avalanche swept him away, others think he may have lost his edge on the steep, icy face and fallen thousands of feet to his death. Some climbers say Everest has a way of taking those who move too fast, and Marco Siffredi may have been one of them. Even today, some climbers claim to have seen ghostly trails etched into the high slopes of Everest, impossible snowboard lines in places no human could have reached. Marco Siffredi chased the ultimate descent and vanished into the white void. Others, though, keep coming back again and again, determined to stand on Everest's summit no matter the cost. One of them was Nobukazu Kuriki, whose final attempt would be his last. Nobukazu Kuriki had a dream: to climb Everest solo in the harshest conditions. He attempted it 7 times, and every time the mountain pushed him back. His most harrowing attempt was in 2012. That year, he aimed for a solo autumn ascent, a feat almost unheard of. With the brutal winds, extreme cold, and no one to help, it was Everest at its most unforgiving. As he climbed higher, the temperature plummeted, -20, -30, -40 degrees Celsius. His fingers and toes began to freeze, but he pushed on. His body was breaking down. Frostbite had set in. Then came the radio call, "Help me." His voice was weak, slurred. He could no longer feel his hands. Rescue teams sprang into action, racing against the mountain. When they found him, his body was ravaged by the cold. Doctors later amputated most of his fingers, leaving him with only one full finger on his hands. But he wasn't done. In May 2018, 6 years later, Kuriki tried one last time. He set off for the summit from Camp 2, determined to succeed. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and exhaustion seeped into his very soul, dragging him into a suffocating darkness. His voice, once filled with fire and determination, now trembled and faltered. When rescuers finally found him, he lay lifeless in his tent. The final battle had been fought, and Everest had won. Some say he was reckless. Others say he was brave. But in the end, Everest had the last word. If you liked this video, subscribe for similar ones or comment below to suggest another.